Before you listen to this story, you need to know something very important. Everything you know about the Arabs before Islam is wrong. Schools taught us that they were ignorant Bedouins who worshipped idols and buried their daughters alive. And that was the end of it. But the truth, my friend, is very different. Let's not talk about Europe just yet, because the Arabs before Islam built a massive dam, considered one of the wonders of ancient engineering. They produced poets whose works are still studied 1,500 years later, like Entara ibn Shaddad, the black slave who became the most famous knight in Arab history, and Imru al-Qais, the lost prince who wrote the greatest poem in the Arabic language while wandering the desert. Yet, these same people also waged a 40-year war over a single camel and another 40-year war over a horse race. How could people of such intelligence and civilization kill each other for 40 years over a camel? How could the same people who built the Marib Dam fail to build a single unified state? Why did the Persians and Romans use the Arabs as tools in their wars? And why were the Arabs content with that? And how, from all this chaos, did a religion emerge that changed the course of history forever? These are the questions we will answer in the story we are about to tell tonight. A story of kings and betrayal, heroes and cowards, love and revenge, blood and poetry, gold, drama, and unnatural family wars stronger than any Turkish series. A story filled with lessons in leadership that you won't find in any book, because when you understand history correctly, it becomes the greatest teacher in your life. This is the Arab world before Islam, the era known in ancient history books as the Age of Ignorance, Jahiliyyah. It is one of the most beautiful stories in history. Before we begin, write in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it? There is something beautiful in thinking about it. Someone listening at 2 a.m. in Saudi Arabia, another at 5 a.m. in Europe, and another at 6 a.m. in America. We are all in different places and different times, but tonight we are united by the same story. We want to understand where we came from. This is the most beautiful thing about this channel. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Geography and Environment. Let's start from the beginning, from the land itself, from the geography that shaped the Arabs and defined their lives. The Arabian Peninsula is a vast stretch of land located in the southwest of Asia, extending over enormous areas. It is bordered by the Red Sea to the west, the Arabian Gulf to the east, the Indian Ocean to the south, and stretches northward to the Levant and Iraq, regions controlled by the great empires of the time. Its area is about 3 million square kilometers, most of which is a barren desert with almost no water. Summer temperatures reach 50 degrees, 102 degrees, and winter nights are freezing cold. Rain is extremely rare, falling only in short periods of the year, and drought is the constant ruler. But this harsh desert was not uniform. It was divided into completely different regions. In the south, in Yemen, the land was relatively fertile thanks to seasonal rains from the ocean. The towering mountains of Yemen stopped the clouds coming from the sea, causing rain to fall and water the green valleys. Here, great civilizations arose, powerful kingdoms were built, and advanced agriculture, trade, and urbanization flourished. In the center, in Najd and the Hijaz, the desert was the sole ruler. Endless sands, mountains, rocky plateaus, and a few scattered oases around wells and springs. Here, the Bedouin tribes lived, moving between the few pastures in search of water and food for their precious animals. Life was extremely harsh. Only the strong survived, and the weak had no place in this terrifying desert world. In the north, in the Levant and Iraq, the land was more fertile thanks to rivers and regular rainfall. Here, the Arabs mixed with the great civilizations, the Byzantine Empire to the west and the Persian Empire to the east. On the coast of the Red Sea, Mecca, Yathrib, Medina, and Taif were important trading cities. These cities were stops for the great caravans that transported goods between Yemen, the Levant, Persia, and Egypt. This harsh and diverse geography shaped the character of the Arabs and determined their way of life and thinking. The desert taught them patience, courage, endurance, and the ability to survive in the most extreme conditions. The oases taught them the value of water, the value of life, and the value of cooperation, sometimes, and conflict over resources at other times. This geographical diversity created diversity in lifestyles, and thus diversity in strength, weakness, wealth, and poverty. Chapter 2. The Great Kingdoms of Yemen. Now, let's travel to the south, to Yemen, where the greatest Arab kingdoms before Islam were established. Yemen was not just an ordinary Arab region. It was the center of an advanced and prosperous civilization for thousands of years. The ancient Arabs called it Arabia Felix, Happy Arabia, because of its fertile lands and immense wealth from global trade. Around the 12th century BCE, the first organized Arab kingdoms appeared in Yemen. The most famous and greatest of these was the Kingdom of Sheba. Its capital was Marib, the legendary city mentioned in the Quran, the Torah, and history books. Sheba was not just a small kingdom, it was an economic and political power that dominated all of southern Arabia. It controlled the trade of frankincense and myrrh, the most valuable commodities in the ancient world, without any significant competition. Frankincense and myrrh were used in temples and religious rituals in all ancient civilizations, from Egypt to Rome to Persia. The almost exclusive source of these goods was southern Arabia, Yemen, Oman, and the coast of the Arabian Sea. The Sabaean caravans set out from Marib, loaded with frankincense, myrrh, precious spices, and perfumes, traveling thousands of kilometers across the barren desert from one station to another until they reached the Levant, Egypt, and Iraq. Along the way, tribes took fees in exchange for protection and passage, so everyone benefited from this trade. The Sabaeans became extremely wealthy, building luxurious palaces, massive temples, and fortified walls around their cities. But their greatest achievement was the Marib Dam, one of the greatest engineering projects in ancient history, a true marvel. The dam held back seasonal rains from the mountains and distributed the water to agricultural lands through a complex irrigation system. It was about 600 meters long and 20 meters high, built from massive, tightly fitted stones. Behind the dam, millions of cubic meters of water were stored, enough to irrigate tens of thousands of acres. The irrigation system was genius. Branching canals reached every field, and gates precisely controlled the amount of water. Thanks to this dam, Marib and its surroundings turned into a green paradise in the heart of the desert. Fields of wheat, barley, palm trees, and fruits. The population grew, wealth multiplied, military power increased, and Sheba became a force to be reckoned with. The Sabaean kings were called Mukarib, unifiers, because they united the tribes under strong central rule. The most famous of these kings was Karabil Watar, who ruled in the 7th century BCE. This great king united most of Yemen under his rule, built magnificent palaces, fought rival kingdoms, and won. His most famous palace was the Palace of Salhin, which poets sang about for centuries, a luxurious palace filled with gold and ornaments. But every great thing, no matter how powerful, must eventually weaken and fall. The kingdom of Sheba entered into conflicts with other kingdoms, Main, Qataban, Hadramaut, and Himyar. The wars drained resources, the central authority weakened, and the tribes began to break away from the central government. The kingdom of Himyar, the new heir. In the 1st century BCE, a new power emerged in Yemen, the kingdom of Himyar. The Himyarites were originally Sabaean tribes who had gained independence and formed their own kingdom in the southern highlands. Their capital was Zafar, a fortified city in the mountains, far from the plains controlled by Sheba. The Himyarites were very clever in politics. They waited patiently, planned wisely for many years, and when Sheba weakened due to internal wars and conflicts, Himyar struck the decisive blow. In the 3rd century CE, Himyar controlled most of Yemen, including Marib, the glorious capital of Sheba. The greatest king of Himyar was Shammar-Uharrish, who united all of Yemen under a single rule for the first time. Shammar-Uharrish fought in all directions, north, south, east, and west, until he subdued all the rebellious tribes. He fought in Hadramaut, Najran, Tihama, and everywhere there was a tribe that refused to submit. After years of brutal wars, he succeeded in unifying Yemen under one banner. For the first time in history, the name Yemen appeared as a single, unified political unit. Shammar-Uharrish added to his royal title the words King of Sheba and Duraidan and Hadramaut in Yemen. The Himyarites maintained traditions, repaired the Marib Dam, and continued the successful trade of frankincense and myrrh. But they also introduced important changes, especially in religion. Some Himyarite kings converted to Judaism, and Judaism spread among the ruling elite in Yemen. The last famous king of Himyar was Yusuf Asar Yathar Du Nuwas, the Jewish king who ruled in the early 6th century CE. Yusuf Asar entered into a conflict with the Christians of Najran and killed many of them in a famous massacre. This massacre is mentioned in the Quran in Surah al-Buruj, the companions of the ditch, who were burned alive. This event angered the Christian Byzantine Empire, which asked its allies, the Aksumites, Ethiopians, to intervene. The Aksumites invaded Yemen in 525 CE, defeated and killed Yusuf Asar, and took complete control of Yemen. Thus ended the rule of the Himyarites, the last great Arab kingdom of Yemen before Islam. Chapter 3. The collapse of the Marib Dam, the catastrophe that changed the history. Now, let's go back a little in time to talk about an event that changed the entire history of the Arabs. The collapse of the Marib Dam, the Great Flood of Arim. The dam, which had stood for more than 1,000 years, began to crack around the 6th century CE. Maintenance was neglected, wars had drained resources, and the central authority had weakened and could no longer repair it. The cracks increased, the fissures widened, and people began to sense the inevitable danger. One day, the dam collapsed completely. Millions of cubic meters of water rushed out in a great flood, sweeping away everything in its path. Fields were submerged, villages destroyed, and people fled. The prosperous life turned into a devastating disaster. The Quran mentions this event in Surah Sheba, the flood of Arim, the divine punishment for a people who were arrogant and ungrateful. After the collapse of the dam, it was no longer possible to irrigate the vast lands as efficiently as before. Drought spread, famines began, and life became very difficult for the people who had been accustomed to prosperity and wealth. So, what did the people do? They migrated. The Great Migration. Entire Yemeni tribes left Yemen in search of new lands and a better life in the north and center. The Aws and Khazraj tribes migrated to Yathrib, which would later become Medina after the migration of the Prophet Muhammad. The Ghassanid tribe migrated to the Levant and established the Ghassanid kingdom, which allied with the Byzantine Romans. The Khuzā tribe settled around Mecca and took control of the Kaaba before the Quraysh took it from them. The Az tribes went to Oman and spread to eastern Arabia in search of water and pasture. This great migration completely changed the political and demographic map of the Arabian Peninsula. Relatively strong and civilized Yemeni tribes spread to the north and mixed with the tribes already there. Some of these tribes founded new kingdoms, while others lived a Bedouin life in the harsh desert. But all of them carried with them memories of Yemen, memories of the great civilization that once existed in Marib. Chapter 4. The Kingdoms of the North. Now, let's move to the north, where different Arab kingdoms were established under completely different conditions. These kingdoms were not as independent as the kingdoms of Yemen. They were under the influence of the great neighboring empires. To the west was the Byzantine Roman Empire, the great Christian power that controlled the Levant, Egypt, and Europe. To the east was the Sasanian Persian Empire, the ancient Zoroastrian power that controlled Iraq, Persia, and Central Asia. These two giant empires were in constant conflict, endless wars over control, influence, and territory. The Arabian Peninsula, especially the northern regions, was a buffer zone between the two rival powers. The Romans and Persians did not want to directly occupy the desert. It had no economic value and could not be controlled, but they wanted indirect control through allied Arab tribes that would protect them from other Bedouin raids. From this, two very important Arab kingdoms emerged, Al-Hira in Iraq and the Ghassanids in the Levant. The kingdom of Al-Hira and the Lakhmids, allies of the Persians. On the edges of Iraq, near the Euphrates River, in a region now called Najaf, the city of Al-Hira was established. Al-Hira was an important cultural and commercial center, a meeting point between the Bedouins and advanced Persian civilization. Around 268 CE, Amr ibn Adi founded the kingdom of Al-Hira. Amr ibn Adi was from the Lachem tribe, a Yemeni Arab tribe that had migrated from the south after the events of the flood of Arim. The ruling dynasty in Al-Hira was known as the Lakhmids, named after the recurring name Al-Mundhir among their kings. The Lakhmids allied with the Sasanian Persian Empire and became an Arab shield protecting Persia's western borders. The Persians provided the Lakhmids with money, weapons, and military support in exchange for protecting the borders from Bedouin raids. The Lakhmids benefited from this alliance: power, wealth, control of trade, and wide influence. Al-Hira became a rich and prosperous city, with luxurious palaces, large markets, and a vibrant cultural life. The most famous Lakhmid kings were Al-Nu'man ibn al-Mundhir, known as Al-Nu'man the Squint-Eyed, who ruled in the 5th century, and Al-Nu'man III ibn al-Mundhir, the last great king of Al-Hira, who lived in the late 6th century. Al-Nu'man III was famous for his generosity and bravery, and many stories about him are found in ancient Arab literature and history books. The most famous is the story of the Day of Misfortune and the Day of Bliss. Al-Nu'man would choose one day a year called the Day of Bliss. Whoever met him on that day would be honored and given great gifts, and another day called the Day of Misfortune. Whoever met him on that day would be killed because it was an unlucky day for him. Al-Hira was also a great cultural center. Poets from all over came to receive awards and gifts. Al-Nabiga al-Dubyani, one of the greatest poets of the Jahiliyyah, pre-Islamic era, was a poet of the court of Al-Hira before he fled from it. Christianity spread widely in Al-Hira, especially the Nestorian sect, and many churches and monasteries were built. The most famous was the monastery of Hind, built by Hind bint al-Harith, the wife of Al-Nu'man, which remained standing until the Islamic era. But the relationship between the Lakhmids and the Persians was not always smooth. Al-Nu'man III had a dispute with Khosrow the Sioux, the king of Persia, over a complex matter involving women, honor, and pride. Khosrow was angered by Al-Nu'man, summoned him to the Persian capital of Ctesiphon, imprisoned him, and either killed him or left him to die in prison. After Al-Nu'man's death in 602 CE, Khosrow abolished the rule of the Lakhmids and appointed a direct Persian governor. This was a major strategic mistake because the Arab tribes refused to submit directly to foreign Persians. When the Muslims came 30 years later to conquer Iraq, they found the Arab tribes angry at the Persians and ready to ally with them. The Ghassanid kingdom, allies of the Romans. On the other side, in the Levant, another Arab kingdom was established that allied with the Byzantine Romans, the Ghassanids. The Ghassanids were a tribe from the Azd of Yemen who had migrated from Yemen after the collapse of the Marib Dam and settled near a spring called Ghassan, from which they took their name. They continued their journey north until they reached the Levant, a fertile and rich region under Roman control. Here, other Arab tribes called the Tanukids lived, who had long been workers for the Romans in the region. The Ghassanids clashed with the Tanukids and managed to defeat them and take control of the region by force and intelligence. The Romans saw that the Ghassanids were stronger and better than the Tanukids, so they appointed them as rulers instead. The alliance between the Ghassanids and the Byzantine Empire lasted for centuries. The Ghassanids established their kingdom around 220 CE and made Jabiyah in the Golan Heights their capital. Their kingdom extended over southern Syria, Palestine, and Jordan, a strategic region between the desert and fertile lands. The most famous Ghassanid king was Al-Harith ibn Jabala, known as Al-Harith the Lame, who ruled in the 6th century CE. Al-Harith ibn Jabala was a strong, brave, and wise man who fought the Lakhmids several times and repelled them from the Levant. The Byzantine Emperor Justinian granted him the title King of the Arabs in honor of his role in protecting the southern borders of the empire. The Ghassanids converted to Christianity under the Melkite sect and built churches and monasteries throughout their territories. They became part of the Christian Byzantine world, but retained their Arabic language and tribal customs. Hassan ibn Thabit, who later became the poet of the Prophet Muhammad, was in his youth a poet of the Ghassanid court before Islam. He praised their kings, received great rewards, and lived a life of luxury and comfort in their palaces. The Ghassanids built beautiful palaces and prosperous cities. The Palace of Mashhada and the Palace of Qasr al-Halabat are among their famous ruins that still stand today. The eternal conflict, Lakhmids vs. Ghassanids. Now, let's talk about the great conflict that lasted for decades between the Lakhmids and the Ghassanids. This conflict was not just a struggle between two Arab tribes. It was a reflection of the greater conflict between Persia and Rome. The Lakhmids were allies of the Persians in the east, the Ghassanids were allies of the Romans in the west, and the desert between them was an open battlefield. Endless wars, mutual raids, bloodshed, victories, and defeats. Each side tried to expand its influence, control trade routes, weaken the other, and please its great allies. One of the most famous battles between the two sides was the Day of Halima, in which the Lakhmids achieved a great victory over the Ghassanids. But the Ghassanids took revenge in other battles. The wars continued without a clear end or decisive victory. This conflict weakened both sides and made them unable to face the coming Islamic threat. When the Islamic armies arrived in the 7th century CE, both kingdoms fell relatively easily and without much resistance. The Battle of Yarmouk in 636 CE ended the rule of the Ghassanids, and their last king, Jabala ibn al-Ayham, converted to Islam and then apostatized. The Battle of Qadisiyah in 636 CE also ended Persian control over Iraq and consequently over Al-Hira as well. Thus ended the era of the Arab kingdoms subordinate to the empires. Chapter 5, Tribal Life and Society. Now, let's descend from the level of kingdoms and great politics and talk about the daily life of ordinary Arabs. How did they live? How was society organized? What were the values they believed in and died for? The tribal system. The tribe above all. Arab society before Islam was a tribal society par excellence. The tribe was the basic political and social unit. Every person belonged to a tribe, and the tribe protected, defended, and avenged them if they were killed or wronged. Without a tribe, a person had no value in the desert, no protection, no place, no rights at all. The tribe consisted of several clans and subclans, all descended from a common ancestor. At the head of the tribe stood the sheikh or chief, a man who enjoyed wisdom, generosity, bravery, and noble lineage. The sheikh did not rule by the power of law, but by the power of respect, prestige, and the ability to solve problems wisely. Important decisions were made in the tribal council, where the elders gathered and consulted on major matters. Tribal fanaticism, the double-edged sword. Tribal fanaticism was the fundamental value in Jahili society, supporting the tribe, right or wrong, without question. If someone from your tribe killed a person from another tribe, you had to defend them, even if they were in the wrong. If someone from your tribe was killed, you had to take revenge, blood for blood, or you would be considered a coward with no honor. This fanaticism had positive aspects: social cohesion, solidarity, and collective protection in a harsh environment. But the negative side was destructive. Endless wars over old blood feuds and vendettas passed down through generations. A single killing could ignite a war that lasted 40 years, in which hundreds of innocent people were killed without guilt. The values of the Jahiliyyah, between nobility and savagery. The Arabs of the Jahiliyyah had great noble values, but also savage, inhuman customs. Generosity was the first and most important value. The Jahili Arab boasted of his generosity more than anything else. He would slaughter camels and sheep to feed guests, even if he was poor, even if his children went hungry afterward. Hatim al-Tai was the most famous generous man in Arab history, and became a proverb for generosity that is still used today, 1,500 years later. Bravery. The Jahili Arab preferred death to cowardice. Dying with honor was better than living in humiliation. He would enter battle with his chest exposed, never fleeing, fighting until his last breath, or achieving victory with honor and pride. Loyalty. If an Arab gave a promise or oath, he was bound by it until death. Betrayal was a stain that could never be erased. Pride in lineage. Every tribe boasted of its ancestors, glories, victories, poets, and great knights. But on the other hand, there were very bad customs. Burying infant girls alive. Some tribes buried their daughters alive out of fear of shame or extreme poverty. The Quran mentions this crime harshly. When the female infant buried alive is asked for what sin she was killed. Disdain for women. In many tribes, women were treated as property, inherited, sold, with no say in their lives. Drinking wine. Wine drinking was widespread, and drunkenness was common in their gatherings, clubs, and markets. Gambling. They gambled on everything, camels, horses, money, even wives sometimes. Bedouin life in the desert. Most Arabs were nomadic Bedouins who lived in black goat hair tents, moving in search of water and pasture. Their life was very simple. Camels, sheep, and horses were their only wealth, their food, their drink, and their means of transportation. The men herded the animals, guarded the tribe, and raided other tribes to steal camels and spoils. The women cooked, milked the sheep, wove clothes and tents, and raised children in harsh conditions. Children grew up quickly, learning horsemanship and combat by the age of 10. A boy became a warrior, carrying a sword. Life was a daily struggle against nature, scorching heat during the day, freezing cold at night, and constant drought. But this harsh life created strong, patient, and resilient men capable of surviving in the toughest conditions. Urban life? A different, but not completely different life. Not all Arabs were Bedouins. Some lived in major trading cities and led a different urban life. Mecca was the most important city, a great commercial and religious center in the barren Hijaz. Yathrib, Medina, was an agricultural city, a green oasis full of palm trees and fields, inhabited by the Adoyus, Khazraj, and Jews. Taif was a mountainous city famous for its mild climate, grapes, and fruits, and was the summer resort of the rich people of Mecca. These cities were active commercial centers. The markets were full of goods from everywhere: India, China, the Levant, and Egypt. People here lived a relatively better life: stone houses, diverse food, greater wealth, and longer stability. But even in the cities, tribalism existed, and tribal conflicts were always present. Chapter 6. The Famous Days of the Arabs. Now, let's talk about the most famous wars of the Jahiliyyah, wars that lasted for decades over trivial reasons. The historians called them the Days of the Arabs, hundreds of small and large wars that took place between rival tribes. But the most famous and longest were two great wars, the War of Basus and the War of Dahis and Ghabra. The War of Basus, 40 years over. A camel. The story began very simply. A lost camel entered a protected area and was killed. But this simple camel ignited a war that lasted 40 years, in which thousands of men were killed. Kulayb ibn Rabi'a, the chief of the Taghlib tribe, was the strongest man in the Arabian Peninsula at the time. He was very arrogant and forbade people from drinking from certain wells or grazing in certain pastures without his permission. He would say, "I have protected this pasture, and whoever enters it without my permission is a trespasser who deserves punishment." Basis, an old woman from the Bakr tribe, came to visit her nephew, Jassas ibn Murra, whose wife was Jalila, the sister of Basis. With her was a camel named Sarab, which was very dear to her. She loved it as if it were her only child in life. One day the camel Sarab strayed and entered the pasture that Kulayb had protected for himself, alone. Kulayb saw the camel and was furious. "How dare a camel enter my pasture without my permission?" He shot an arrow that pierced the camel's udder. The camel fell and died. Basis heard the news and came out of her tent screaming, crying in sorrow, humiliation, and shame. "Oh shame! Oh humiliation!" She called her nephew, Jassas ibn Murra, the man who was supposed to protect her and her camel. "Oh Jassas, where are you while I, your neighbor, have my camel killed, and you do nothing?" Jassas felt the shame. Kulayb had insulted his guest. This was unbearable. Honor had to be restored immediately. Jassas went to Kulayb and tried to talk to him, asking him to apologize or pay blood money for the camel. Kulayb refused arrogantly. "Your camel entered my pasture. It deserved to be killed, and I will not pay anything." Jassas was enraged and stabbed Kulayb with a spear, killing him. The strongest man in the Arabian Peninsula fell dead because of a camel. The Taghlib tribe, Kulayb's tribe, demanded revenge. "The blood of our chief must be avenged. Jassas must die." The Bakr tribe, Jassas's tribe, refused to hand him over. "He is one of us, and whoever wants to kill him must go through us first." And so, the war began. The War of Basus, 40 years of continuous fighting, battles, skirmishes, raids, and endless vendettas. Among the most famous days of this war were the day of Nahi, the day of Wardat, the day of Hanb, the day of Qazibat, and the day of Talhaq al-Lum. Al-Muhalhil ibn Rabi'ah, Kulayb's brother, swore to kill 100 men from Bakr in revenge for his brother. And indeed, in every battle, he killed dozens of men without mercy or pity. He would recite sad poetry, mourning his brother, and at the same time kill everyone he encountered from the Bakr tribe. The war continued until thousands of men from both sides were killed. Children grew into youth, youth grew into old men, and the old men died. Finally, some wise men, including Al-Harith ibn Abad, intervened and forced the two sides to make peace. The war ended in vain. No compensation, no justice. They stopped killing because they were exhausted, weakened, and no longer had the strength to continue. The Arabs called this war al-Basus al-Qatiya, the cut-off basis, because it ended without a clear result or true justice. The War of Dahis and Ghabra, 40 years over a horse race. The second famous war, the War of Dahis and Ghabra, began because of a horse race, deceit, and a bet. Dahis and Ghabra were the names of two famous horses. Dahis was a stallion, and Ghabra was a mare. Both were among the fastest horses. Dahis belonged to Qais ibn Zuhair of the Abs tribe, and Ghabra belonged to Hudhaifa ibn Badr of the Dubyani tribe. Abs and Dubyani were tribes of the Ghatafan Confederation, cousin tribes with constant rivalry and raids. Qais ibn Zuhair and Hudhaifa ibn Badr agreed to a race between the two horses, with a bet of 100 camels. The race distance was very long, several days of running through the desert, valleys, and rugged mountains. The race began. Dahis took off at incredible speed and took the lead over Ghabra. It was clear that he would win easily, but Hudhaifa ibn Badr had devised a cunning plan. He ordered some of his men to hide along the way. When Dahis passed, they suddenly appeared, shouted, and waved sticks, scaring the horse and stopping him from running. Ghabra took advantage of the opportunity, overtook Dahis, and reached the finish line first, winning the race by deceit. Hudhaifa demanded the bet, 100 camels. Qais refused. "This is clear cheating. I will not pay anything." The dispute turned into a quarrel. The quarrel turned into a fight, and Hudhaifa ibn Badr was killed by Qais ibn Zuhair. The Dubyani tribe demanded revenge, and the Abs tribe refused to hand over Qais. And so, the War of Dahis and Ghabra began. Another 40 years of war, thousands of dead, blood, vendettas, and hatred passed down through generations. In this war, Antara ibn Shaddad, the Black Knight of Obs, the legendary warrior poet, appeared. Antara was the son of a black slave, and his mother was black, but he proved his bravery in battles, so his father acknowledged him, and he became free. He fought with unmatched valor, recited beautiful poetry, and loved his cousin Abla with a famous chaste love. One of his poems in this war says, "Even if I sent my spear with a coward, it would strike terror with my awe and face the beasts." The war continued until two wise and rational men, Al-Harith ibn Auf and Hurm ibn Sinan, intervened. These two men gathered a large sum of money from their own wealth and paid blood money for all the dead on both sides. They forced the two tribes to make peace, and the war finally ended after 40 years of destruction and continuous ruin. The poet Zuhair ibn Abi Sulma, one of the authors of the Mu'allaqat, praised the two men in an immortal poem saying, "By my life, what excellent leaders you were in every situation, whether difficult or easy. You reconciled Abs and Dubyani after they had perished, and you spread among them the fragrance of reconciliation. Whoever smells the fragrance of reconciliation is like an Arab proverb. War is like perfume that cannot be returned to its bottle." Chapter 7. Lessons from these wars. Now, let's pause for a moment and think, what do we learn from these long, painful stories? Lesson 1. Trivial conflicts can turn into huge disasters if not addressed wisely from the beginning. A camel, a horse race, very simple things, but pride and tribal fanaticism turned them into wars that killed thousands of innocents. Lesson 2. Revenge never ends. Blood calls for blood, and a killing calls for another killing until the tribes are completely annihilated. Only wisdom, reason, and tolerance can stop the cycle of violence. Revenge only produces more revenge. Lesson 3. Wise leadership can end conflicts that have lasted for decades with a kind word and financial sacrifice. Al-Harith ibn Auf and Horm ibn Sinan sacrificed their wealth to save their tribes. This is true leadership and noble sacrifice. Lesson 4. The absence of a strong and just central authority inevitably leads to chaos and destructive civil wars. The tribes needed a state, laws, and fair justice, but tribal fanaticism prevented that until Islam came later. Chapter 8. Trade and Economy. Now, let's move to a different topic: trade, the backbone of the Arab economy before Islam. The Arabs were skilled traders. Control of trade routes was the source of wealth and power for all tribes and cities. The frankincense and myrrh route. The lifeline. The most important trade route in the Arabian Peninsula was the frankincense and myrrh route, which connected Yemen to the Levant. This route transported frankincense, myrrh, spices, and perfumes from southern Arabia to its north and then to the whole world. The caravans were huge. Thousands of camels loaded with goods traveled through the desert for weeks and long months. The stops along the way were the major cities and oases: Mecca, Yathrib, Taif, and Duma al-Jandal. Each city took fees and taxes in exchange for allowing the caravans to pass and providing protection, water, and food. Mecca benefited the most. Mecca's strategic location in the middle of the route made it a great commercial center. The Quraysh tribe, which inhabited Mecca, became the richest Arab tribe thanks to its control of trade. Abdul Muttalib ibn Hashim, the grandfather of the Prophet Muhammad, was one of the richest and most famous merchants of Mecca. Muhammad himself, before prophethood, was a trader who traveled with the caravans of Quraysh to the Levant, Yemen, and Iraq. The two famous journeys were the winter journey and the summer journey. The Quran mentions the winter and summer journeys in Surah Quraysh. For the accustomed security of the Quraysh, their accustomed security in the caravan of winter and summer. In the winter, the caravans went south to Yemen, where it was warm and the Yemeni goods were very precious. In the summer, the caravans went north to the Levant, where the weather was mild and the goods were diverse. These journeys were organized operations: large trading companies, collective financing, profit distribution, and precise accounting systems. Quraysh succeeded in making protection treaties with all the tribes along the route. Ilaf means security and protection, so their caravans traveled safely. No one dared to attack them because Quraysh had paid everyone and satisfied everyone. The major markets, economic and cultural forums. In addition to caravan trade, there were major seasonal markets where Arabs from all over gathered. The most famous of these markets were three: Souk Okaz, Souk Majana, and Souk Du al-Majaz, all near Mecca. Souk Okaz was the most famous of all. It was held in the month of Du al-Qida, one of the sacred months. Traders came from everywhere, displayed their goods, exchanged commodities, bought, sold, and made huge profits. But the market was not just a place for trade. It was also an important cultural, social, and political gathering. Poets came to recite their poems and people listened and judged. The best poets gained wide fame. Orators delivered their speeches, wise men judged disputes, and tribes made political treaties and agreements. Souk Okaz was held for 20 days, then people moved to Souk Majana for 10 days, and then to Souk Du al-Majaz. Chapter 9. Literature and Poetry. Now, let's enter the world of literature and poetry, the most refined art in which the pre-Islamic Arabs excelled. Poetry among the Arabs was not just beautiful words. It was the register of the Arabs, their historical and cultural record. Poetry was the tongue of the tribe and its pride. Every tribe boasted of its poets. The poet was the spokesman of the tribe, its official representative, and the defender of its honor. If a great poet appeared in a tribe, celebrations were held, animals were slaughtered, and other tribes came to congratulate them. Why? Because the poet was a weapon stronger than the sword sometimes. He could praise his tribe and elevate its status or satirize its enemies and humiliate them. Pre-Islamic poetry was characterized by strength, grandeur, brilliant imagery, and very refined, eloquent language. The pre-Islamic poem, Qasida, usually began with standing among the ruins. The poet remembers his beloved and the old homestead, then moves on to describe the journey and the camel or horse. then to boast about himself and his tribe, and finally to satire or praise. The 7 Mu'allaqat, the peak of pre-Islamic poetry. The greatest achievement of pre-Islamic poetry was the 7 Mu'allaqat, 7 long poems considered by the Arabs to be the best of all. They were called Mu'allaqat, the suspended poems, because, according to some narratives, they were hung on the walls of the Kaaba in honor, and it was also said that they were called so because they were suspended in the minds and hearts and could never be forgotten. The 7 Mu'allaqat are the poems of 7 great poets: Imru al-Qais, Tarafa ibn al-Abd, Zuhair ibn Abi Sulma, Labid ibn Rabi'a, Amr ibn Kulthum, Al-Harith ibn Hiliza, and Antara ibn Shaddad. Imru al-Qais, the wandering poet, the lost prince who lost his kingdom and wandered in the desert, mourning his past. His Mu'allaqa begins with the most famous line in Arabic poetry: "Stop, let us weep over the memory of a beloved and a dwelling between Dhat al-Lawa and Dhat al-Homul, and Tara ibn Shaddad, the Black Knight, the slave who became free, the warrior and lover who loved Abla." His Mu'allaqa is full of pride, bravery, and dignity. Have the poets left any ruins untrodden, or has the abode been known after long oblivion? Zuhair ibn Abi Sulma, the poet of wisdom, who praised Al-Harith ibn Auf and Hurm ibn Sinan for ending the War of Dahis. His poetry is full of wisdom, morals, and nobility. He was one of the most ethically and religiously refined poets of the Jahiliyyah before Islam. These poets and hundreds of others immortalized the Arabic language, preserved history, and depicted Jahili life in all its details. What is amazing is that pre-Islamic poetry was preserved orally from generation to generation, from father to son, until Islam came and it was written down. This indicates the strength of Arab memory and the importance of poetry in their daily lives and rich culture. Chapter 10, Religions and Beliefs. Now, let's talk about the religious aspect. What did the Arabs worship before Islam? The answer is not simple because the Arabs were not all of one religion. There were multiple religions. Idol worship, the most common religion. Most Arabs, especially in Central Arabia, worshipped idols, statues of stone or wood. Each tribe had its own idol, and sometimes each house had its own idol that they worshipped and asked for blessings and protection. The most famous idols were 3: Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat. The Arabs considered them the daughters of Allah. Exalted is he above that. Al-Lat was in Taif, a huge idol with guards and servants. Tribes from everywhere came to seek its favor and make offerings. Al-Uzza was in the valley of Nakhla near Mecca, a large tree with a building around it. Quraysh greatly revered it. Manat was on the coast of the Red Sea between Mecca and Yathrib, and was the oldest of the 3 idols among the Arabs. Inside the Kaaba itself, the house built by Abraham, there were 360 idols. The greatest of them was Hubal, the large idol placed there by Amr ibn Luhai, the first to introduce idols to the Arabian Peninsula. They would circumambulate the Kaaba, slaughter sacrifices to the idols, and ask them for rain, victory, children, and sustenance. They believed that these idols were a means of getting closer to Allah. We only worship them so that they may bring us closer to Allah. Judaism, especially in Yemen and Yathrib, and Judaism spread in some regions of the Arabian Peninsula, especially in Yemen, Yathrib, Khaybar, and Tama. In Yemen, some Himyarite kings converted to Judaism, the last of whom was Yusuf Asar, Du Nuwas, who burned the Christians of Najran. In Yathrib, there were 3 large Jewish tribes, Banu Qainuqa, Banu Nadir, and Banu Qurayza. These Jews were skilled traders and craftsmen who made weapons and jewelry and owned fortified castles. They had a great influence on the Aws and Khazraj, the 2 Arab tribes in Yathrib, even in their wars. Christianity in Najran, the Levant, and Al-Hira. Christianity spread in other regions, especially in Najran in the south, Al-Hira in the east, and the Levant in the north. Najran was an important Christian center with a large church, a bishop, priests, and deacons. When Yusuf Asar burned them in the trench, they became martyrs in Christian history and were mentioned in the Quran. Al-Hira, as we mentioned, was Christian, mostly of the Nestorian sect, and some Lakhmid kings were Christians. The Ghassanids in the Levant were Christians of the Melkite sect, loyal to the Byzantine Empire. Lesson 1. Trivial conflicts can turn into huge disasters if not addressed wisely from the beginning. A camel, a horse race. Very simple things, but pride and tribal fanaticism turned them into wars that killed thousands of innocents. Lesson 2. Revenge never ends. Blood calls for blood, and a killing calls for another killing until the tribes are completely annihilated. Only wisdom, reason, and tolerance can stop the cycle of violence. Revenge only produces more revenge. Lesson 3. Wise leadership can end conflicts that have lasted for decades with a kind word and financial sacrifice. Al-Harith ibn Auf and Hurm ibn Sinan sacrificed their wealth to save their tribes. This is true leadership and noble sacrifice. Lesson 4. The absence of a strong and just central authority inevitably leads to chaos and destructive civil wars. The tribes needed a state, laws, and fair justice, but tribal fanaticism prevented that until Islam came later. The Hanifs, the few monotheists. There were also a few individuals who rejected idol worship and sought the true religion brought by Ibrahim. These were called Hanifs, singular, Hanif, meaning those who turned away from polytheism to pure monotheism for Allah. The most famous of them was Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail, the uncle of Umar ibn al-Khattab, who completely rejected idol worship. Waraqa ibn Nawfal, the cousin of Khadija, the wife of the Prophet, was a Christian who then became a Hanif, seeking the truth. These Hanifs felt that there was something wrong with idol worship, but had not yet received the correct religion. Chapter 11. Mecca and the Kaaba. Now, we must stop at Mecca, the most important city in the history of the Arabs before Islam. Mecca was the religious, commercial, and political center of the Arabian Peninsula. All Arabs respected and sanctified it. The Kaaba was their Qibla, direction of prayer. In the heart of Mecca stands the sacred house, the Kaaba, the most sacred place for all Arabs. The Arabs believed that the Kaaba was built by Ibrahim and his son Ismail thousands of years ago, and this is true, as the Quran tells us. And mention, when Ibrahim was raising the foundations of the house, and with him, Ismail, the Kaaba was the house of Allah, a place of worship, but over time, the Arabs filled it with idols and statues. All Arabs from all tribes performed the Hajj, pilgrimage, to the Kaaba annually. They would circumambulate it 7 times, slaughter sacrifices, and ask for blessings. The 4 sacred months, Dhu al-Qida, Dhu al-Hijjah, Muharram, and Rajab, were months of peace. During these months, wars stopped, caravans were safe, and people performed Hajj to the Kaaba without fear of being killed or raided. Quraysh ruled Mecca. The Quraysh tribe, the tribe of the Prophet Muhammad, was the ruling tribe in Mecca from the 5th century CE. Qusay ibn Kilab, the 5th great-grandfather of the Prophet, was the one who gathered Quraysh and settled them in Mecca after they had been scattered. He expelled the Khuzara tribe, which had controlled the Kaaba before them, and made the leadership exclusively for Quraysh. Quraysh divided the roles among themselves. Each clan of Quraysh had a specific function in serving the Kaaba and the pilgrims. The Banu Hashim, the clan of the Prophet, were responsible for Sikaya and Rifada, providing water and food to the pilgrims. The Banu Abd al-Dar were responsible for Hijaba, holding the keys to the Kaaba, opening and closing it, and overseeing its affairs. The Banu Makhzum were responsible for leadership, leading the army in wars, raids, and defending Mecca. This system made Mecca relatively stable, and made Quraysh the strongest tribe in the Arabian Peninsula without dispute. But there was fierce competition between the clans of Quraysh, especially between Banu Hashim and Banu Umayyah, over leadership. The event of the elephant, an attempt to destroy the Kaaba. In 570 CE, the year the Prophet Muhammad was born, a great event occurred that changed history. Abraha al-Ashram, the Ethiopian governor of Yemen, decided to destroy the Kaaba to force the Arabs to perform Hajj to his church in Sana'a. He prepared a huge army with a great elephant and marched toward Mecca to destroy the sacred house and humiliate the Arabs. Quraysh was not able to resist. The Ethiopian army was much stronger. The people of Mecca fled to the surrounding mountains. Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of the Prophet and the leader of Quraysh, went to Abraha to negotiate, but he refused to turn back. Abdul Muttalib said the famous words, "I am the lord of the camels, and the house has its lord who will protect it." Abraha stood before the Kaaba with his army and the elephant and ordered the elephant to advance to destroy the house. But the elephant refused to move. It knelt on the ground and did not take a single step toward the Kaaba, no matter how much they beat it. Suddenly, flocks of birds appeared in the sky, the birds of Ababil, carrying small stones. "Have you not seen how your Lord dealt with the companions of the elephant? Did he not make their plan into misguidance? And he sent against them birds in flocks, striking them with stones of hard clay, and he made them like eaten straw. The stones fell on the army, killing and infecting them with strange diseases. Their bodies fell apart, piece by piece. Abraha himself fled, but the disease struck him, and he died on the way before reaching Yemen. This miracle elevated the status of Mecca even more, and made Quraysh prouder and more honorable." Chapter 12. The situation before Islam. Now, we have reached the final stage, the political and social situation just before the advent of Islam. The 6th century CE, the century in which Muhammad was born and the message was revealed, was a century full of chaos. The weakness of the Arab kingdoms. The great Arab kingdoms had fallen or weakened. Yemen was under Ethiopian and then Persian control. The rule of the Lakhmids and Al-Hira ended. The Persians abolished Arab rule and appointed direct Persian governors. The Ghassanids weakened due to conflicts with the Romans and the Lakhmids and became a shadow of their former power. The Arab tribes were divided. There was no unity, no central authority. Each tribe fought the other without stopping. Drought and famine were widespread. Some years were so harsh that they were called the Years of the Elephant and Al-Fijar, the sacrilege. Foreign powers control. The Sasanian Persian Empire from the east and the Byzantine Empire from the west competed for influence in the peninsula. Both used the Arab tribes as tools in their conflict, funding them, arming them, and pushing them to fight. The Arabs were in a weak position, no real power, no independence, just followers of the great powers. The contempt with which the empires viewed the Arabs was clear. Ignorant Bedouins with no civilization or value. The urgent need for unification and reform. Arab society desperately needed radical change, a religion to unite them, a leader to gather them, and a system to rule them with justice. Polytheism was superstition. Tribal wars were destructive. Social injustice was rampant against the weak and the poor. Women were oppressed, slaves were enslaved, and children were killed out of fear of poverty. Moral values had deteriorated in many aspects. The Arabs had the potential for greatness, bravery, intelligence, a refined language, and a strategic location. But they were scattered, lost, killing each other without a noble goal or message to live for. In this dark chaos, in this destructive anarchy, in this weakness and division, Allah was preparing for the Arabs and the world a great message that would change the course of history forever. Muhammad ibn Abdullah was growing up in Mecca, an orphan, poor, no one knowing that he would be the seal of the prophets. Allah was raising him under his care, preparing him for the great message, the message that would unite the Arabs, build a great civilization, a message that would bring them out of darkness into light, from ignorance to Islam, from division to strong unity. Conclusion. Lessons and morals. We have reached the end, a long journey through centuries of Arab history before Islam. We saw great kingdoms, brutal wars, thriving trade, immortal poetry, multiple religions, noble values, and savage customs, civilization and Bedouinism, strength and weakness, glory and humiliation. From the great Marib Dam to its destructive collapse, to the migration of tribes in every direction, from the glorious kingdom of Sheba to the unifying kingdom of Himyar, to the fall under Ethiopian occupation, from the Lakhmids and Al-Hira to the Ghassanids in the Levant, to the eternal conflict between the allies of Persia and the allies of Rome, from the War of Basus over a camel to the War of Dahis and Ghabra over a horse race, to 40 years of bloodshed, from the poets of the Mu'allaqat, Imru al-Qais, Antara, and Zuhair, to the great literary markets in Okaz, from the worship of 360 idols to Judaism in Yathrib, to Christianity in Najran, from Mecca, the center of trade and religion, to the Kaaba, the Qibla of the Arabs, to the miraculous event of the elephant. All of this was paving the way, resetting the stage, preparing the ground for the emergence of the eternal message of Islam. 5 practical lessons. Division kills even the strongest. Though Arabs had all the elements of power, but division and tribal fanaticism made them weak against the empires. In today's world, for companies, individuals, and countries, division and disunity kill any project, no matter how strong. Unity is strength, and division is weakness. This is an enduring lesson from the long history of the Arabs before Islam. Infrastructure is the foundation of civilization. The Marib Dam, a single engineering project, turned the desert into a paradise and built a great civilization for centuries. In the world of entrepreneurship, investing in infrastructure, systems, and operations is what builds lasting institutions. Do not build on sand, build on a solid foundation, and you will last for decades, even after you are gone. Trivial conflicts destroy empires. A camel, a horse race. Very trivial things ignited wars that killed thousands and destroyed economies. In our lives and companies, small conflicts over ego and pride destroy years of building. Beware of trivial conflicts. Address them quickly and wisely before they turn into irreparable disasters. Wise leadership ends, decades long. Wars Al-Harith ibn Auf and Hurm ibn Sinan, 2 men who spent their own money, ended a 40-year war. True leadership is sacrifice, not just words. A real leader pays the price from his own pocket, comfort, and pride. If you want to be a great leader, be ready to sacrifice and pay from your own pocket for the good of the group. Opportunity comes to those who prepare themselves well. Muhammad was born in Mecca, the center of trade and religion. He learned trade, leadership, and how to deal with people. Then the moment came, and he was ready, so he changed the world. In your life, always be prepared. Learn, train, read, and acquire skills, because opportunity will come suddenly. My personal opinion. Personally, after this long journey, I feel deep admiration for the Arabs before Islam. Yes, they had fatal flaws, but they also had noble values, an ancient civilization, and great achievements. Islam did not come to erase everything but to reform, refine, purify, and perfect the virtues. It's time to sleep, my friend. This was the complete story of the Arabs before Islam, the age of ignorance, with all its details, events, and characters. If you like the content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with your interested friends. Tata tuta, the story is over.